Yeah, it would suck if Disney sent you a C&D. Come on, would you really put it past a mouse? I guess this tropical festival arc, as we could call it, continued this week as our heroines discussed what they could do for the event that they were hosting. And of course, Laura, being Laura, wanted something that she could personally spearhead. That's typecasting, Manatsu. Anyway, they decided to put on a play, but realizing that this franchise has kind of overdone The Little Mermaid by this point, they decided to go with a more original tale, which of course brought up Minori's old script about searching for magical fruits across the world with a mermaid. Well, I'm sure it'll be fine, just as long as you don't have a random crossover with Gintama. Also, major points to the storyboard are for this really subtle yet effective little change of emotion in Minori's expression getting across her distress. It's kind of a pity that they spelled it out later in the episode, but still nicely done there, Toshiaki Komura, whom I'm starting to realize has done a lot of work for this season. Anyway, Minori wasn't exactly comfortable over the idea of digging up her old shame, and her friends weren't exactly helping by piling on the pressure. I mean, yeah, it ended up spurring her on in the end, but I personally wouldn't recommend doing this with a struggling author. That said, they did genuinely think she had a good basis for a strong story. Or, you know, she could have been lying to get you all off her back. Thankfully, Laura did bring up a better point immediately after, saying that Minori wouldn't have written a whole script without at least an inkling of wanting to see it through to the end. On top of that, they also brought up pretty much all of the major bullet points of Minori's arc so far. Now, I was going to say this was a little unnecessary, but then again, the gap between this and her last major character episode was about 12 episodes ago, so it was probably a necessary evil. It does kind of highlight a major issue with the series and its stop-and-go character arcs, which, as I've said, was likely by design, as they have admitted that they've been holding back on this stuff until, like, near the end of the series. Anyway, Minori did dig up her old script again, and in keeping with her character arc so far, did take the criticism she had received into consideration, not that it helped with her writer's block at all. Though, above all else, I'm surprised at the implication that she stayed up all night stressing out over this, and yet showed absolutely no signs of fatigue throughout this entire episode. Good lord, what I would give for that kind of insomnia. However, her friends soon arrive, with Manatsu having come up with the idea that they should look for a devil fruit, a legendary papaya like in Minori's story. Of course, they knew no such thing existed, but as we soon see, they were at least on the right path, as they did find some regular papaya, but of course they had to be advertised like something special. More importantly, Minori drops some interesting facts about the developmental stages it goes through, showing that she does at least have the essential book knowledge on her subject. While I do believe in artistic liberties, I also do think you should do at least a little bit of research, be it some sort of source material, or even the genre you're writing for. Otherwise, you really shouldn't be too surprised when your show doesn't get a second season. All that said, she was kind of lacking in something else, as we'd soon see. Meanwhile, at the Lair of the Witch, Elda was doing her usual thing of just playing around, while Butler did what he specialized in. On a recommendation from a greengrocer, our heroine stopped by a plantation that specialized in papayas. There, we learn more about the produce, as well as who wrote this episode, judging by this unique style of humor. Hi Yoshimi Narita, glad you found time to write for this show again, in the middle of writing for My Senpai is Annoying. I have a few more things I want to say about her script for this episode, but for now, let's focus on the author on screen, as Minori revealed that in spite of her encyclopedic knowledge about it, and even naming her alter ego after it, she had never actually eaten papaya. Hey, don't blame the girl. I mean, I've lived in Hawaii my whole life, and I never tried my first papaya until, like, my late 20s. FYI, that was also my last papaya ever, because, I don't know, it just was a little too waxy for me, and even this episode's not really gonna change my mind on that. Anyway, this did lead into arguably one of the strongest character moments of this series, as Minori revealed that, in spite of her book smarts, she was kind of short-sighted. After all, just reading about the subject of your story often isn't going to suffice, especially for easily attainable things like a fruit that many people will have their own opinions towards, and thus their own expectations of a story involving it. However, being obsessed with efficiency as well as a bit of a recluse, Minori didn't consider these sorts of subjective variables, and thus really just set herself up for failure. This, combined with her usual overthinker tendencies, drove her into an endless cycle of reclusiveness that we saw her at the beginning of the series. This is really good stuff that really effectively ties her whole arc together. I just kind of wish we didn't get this obstructive Narita humor in the middle of the emotional scene.
It's just a metaphor, dude.
Ill-timed jokes aside, Minori's friends managed to spur her on and even make her drop some foreshadowing for later in the episode. Moreover, the plantation owner, being kind of overly generous, gave our heroines a full papaya feast. Like, seriously dude, I get wanting to spread the word about your product, but how long did it take you to make all of that on top of running your plantation? That said, the effort he and his workers clearly put into harvesting the fruit, along with everything her friends had done for her, made Minori appreciate her namesake more than she probably would have if she had just eaten it normally. Anyway, I guess it was a good time as any for a Monster of the Week fight, and oh come on, that's just Crab Roller! Y'all are totally stealing from the Pokemon IP. Toei, one of the most hypocritical companies in existence. Granted, I don't think the Brawling Crab had access to quick attack, so I guess this was different. But yeah, the fight this week was okay, if a little too reliant on the Aura spamming. Highlight of course came from Minori, whom, after delivering a really good speech of everything she's gone through in this series, came up with a pretty clever plan utilizing the aforementioned foreshadowing.
Tell them to triangulate their firepower. That way they can win.
Good god, my brain is full of nothing but stupid 90s references. But yeah, Minori's plan was to lead the Yaneda into her little line of sight for easy pickings. With that, they defeated the Nintendo lawsuit, and the episode ended with Minori assuring her friends that she'd be able to write a script for the festival, having gotten a taste of her muse. And she wasn't just gonna write a second draft of her mermaid story, but rather their story. Of the three other cures who aren't the main lead or the deuteragonist, I would say the conclusion to Minori's arc sits comfortably in the middle. It doesn't quite reach the emotional highs or feeling of finality like Asuka's arc, but it also was relatively consistent with her character arc, unlike with Sangol. And while there still could be a little more, as they still have to actually pull off the play and everything, I would say this was the most logical conclusion to Minori's arc, appropriate considering the character. Even though she was one of the more subdued characters in terms of general presence, I think they managed to make Minori's arc work really well by completely going in on her quiet overthinker gimmick. By doing so, it really made the sparse moments when she broke out emotionally far more dramatic and or humorous than her peers. Which in turn kind of matched up with this episode when she tasted her namesake for the first time and had a unique experience no one else could. I really like this message of encouraging creative types to try and actively seek their own inspirations rather than just confine themselves to stuff like books. After all, everyone's going to have their own subjective experiences that they can bring to their work, and in turn, make it unique rather than cookie cutter like how Minori's script was originally. This all ties together nicely, making for one of the more consistent arcs in the show. Granted, I do wish this episode had a little more consistency in its tone. I mean, I get that Narita likes to slip in her signature humor, but for this episode, it did feel more than a little intrusive, especially with Manatsu being a little uncharacteristically insensitive. Though I guess that kind of comes with being away from this show for about 20 episodes while working on a rom-com in between. That aside, overall, this was still a very strong wrap-up for Minori's arc. And while I personally prefer Asuka's arc, this was still a very close second in my books. All that's left now is to see how the real mermaid tale ends between Manatsu and Laura. Hopefully it gets an ending at least on par with whatever Minori cooks up. If you haven't seen it yet, we actually managed to get part 2 of the Symphogear XV review up earlier this week, and we'll try to get the last part up before the end of the year, or at least early into 2022. And while I do have some issues with storytelling, I gotta say it's been a really fun show to review. Hell, if anything, it reminded me of certain other shows that I do really want to cover eventually. And considering the very unfortunate situation that has befallen Totally Not Mark, which I do highly suggest you look up for yourself, I think it's only a matter of time before this channel gets struck for like the 3rd time now. If we do get hit, well, we'll try to fight it as always, but if it doesn't work out, we're also ready to migrate to a secondary channel to cover some different subjects. Still, hopefully not until then. Farewell for now, my friends, and yeah, I think I've got a puzzle to build.